Hank Paulson's jawboning of capital requirement reduction was with the SEC. And they just God knows why. One can theorize, but they just waived these capital requirements again that had been in place for some time. And the Wall Street bankers, and Paulson wasn't alone in doing this. There were other investment bankers down there, but Hank Paulson, before he became the Secretary of the Treasury and got the Congress, meaning you and I, to cough up $1 trillion to pay back the banks, he was the prime salesman of subprime mortgages when he was with Goldman Sachs. In other words, he's selling the hell out of this junk. Now the banks are full of it, including his own. Then he, right before the financial crisis, he leaves Goldman Sachs, becomes Secretary of the Treasury, and basically browbeats Congress into this outrageous stimulus plan, which did nothing but pay back the bankers. It just paid back his friends.
Where does TARP come into any of this? I don't understand TARP, and I don't know how many people do, but what is it?
Well, that is TARP. TARP is the stimulus plan. That's the acronym for, what's that stand for? Troubled Asset Relief Program is what that is. And that's just the stimulus. That's just Paulson going to Congress and going, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. You need to approve. It was about $800 billion. With interest, it was about $1 trillion.
Didn't it end up being more than that, too?
Well, there are other programs. The TARP program, with interest is about $1 trillion, give or take. But he said if you don't approve this money, the world will fall apart. The economic structure in this country and around the world will fall apart. There will be riots. I listened to one congressman on the floor of the House after this.
Wasn't that Brad Sherman?
It was Brad Sherman.
Yeah.
Exactly who it was, Brad Sherman, who had the guts to stand on the floor of the House and talk about the kinds of outrageous threats that Paulson made. But he scared these guys enough. And to this, you've got to, in my opinion, got to go to Congress and go, get some backbone, you guys. But just because Hank Paulson had been the chairman of Goldman Sachs, anything that comes out of his mouth is supposed to be golden, no pun intended. And they passed this bill. So, and the bill, as you may remember, your listeners may remember, had a provision in it that the sole discretion over this money was the Secretary of Treasury's, and nobody could question it, nobody could sue him, nobody could do anything. He was like, it was just, Congress turned over $800 billion of taxpayer money to this guy who was an investment banker from New York who came down to bail out his friends. That's what happened.
I think I saw something on YouTube with Alan Grayson. I can't remember who he was talking to, whether it was Paulson or somebody else.
No, he was talking to the Inspector General of the Fed, a woman.
Okay, and he was asking about what went into these payouts. Who do they go to? I saw one with Paulson. Finally, an answer came. It went into credit default swaps and other types of assets, but he wasn't allowed to talk about it. And basically his answer was that when Alan asked him, by what authority can you do that in an untransparent way? And he said, you gave us that authority in the creation of the Federal Reserve Act. I was pretty stunned.
I was presumptuous because I thought you were talking about another interview.
I did see that other interview too, but go ahead.
There were both of them. The one was Alan Grayson asking the Inspector General of the Fed, a woman whose name escapes me, what happened to the money, and he kept asking the question in all kinds of different ways. She just basically went, Congressman, we're certainly here to help you, and so forth and so on. I'll have to get back to you on that. We really don't have that information to hand. She just never answered the questions. On the grilling of Paulson, and the shenanigans of the bailout are continuing to attract Congress's attention as we speak. There were hearings held last week on this by the House Oversight Committee, pushed by the minority member on there, Darrell Issa, getting these guys. And Paulson testified again last week along with Geithner, and they were focused on the shenanigans with AIG, the insurance giant, whereby the Federal Reserve coughed up this money to AIG, and AIG paid the investment bankers back in a very sleazy deal, and that investigation is still going on. But the interview that you're talking about, you're right. I'm not sure who it was.
It was Alan Grayson who was talking to Henry Paulson, but I will tell you one thing that was funny. Henry Paulson was actually very polite, even though he said it's none of your blank business. In the meta communication was it's none of your F business. The overt communication was you gave us that authority when the Federal Reserve Act was created. In other words, we don't have to answer to you. But my other question to you is, which is not in your book, but I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if you feel like spending a couple minutes on this. Do you think that the AAA credit rating mechanism, that the credit rating companies also need to go through a different level of transparency? Because there were some leaks in 2009 that there was payoffs and shenanigans with the credit rating agencies. Are we supposed to believe that the credit rating agencies are also pure?
Well, clearly these guys were part of the problem. And
because that's a way to monetize an economy, is to invoke a AAA credit rating.
Well, here's what happened. Yes, you're right. Here's what happened. The banks, and I'm using Goldman here, but other banks did it, but Goldman did it the most, I think, in terms of the numbers. They package up these subprime mortgages because of the Community Reinvestment Act. You've got all these mortgages from low-income people and folks that can't afford to pay for the mortgages. They get packaged up. They are called, collateralized debt obligations. The investment banks get hold of them, and now they're going to sell them to banks. They're going to just turn around and sell them back to banks. To do that, they go to an insurance company, AIG, and they get something called a credit default swap, which is a big, fancy-sounding name, which is essentially insurance, insuring the bank that if the loans in the subprime mortgage package go bad, that the insurance company will pay the bank.
Why would the insurance company do it?
Because they made big fees. Because they made big fees when they issued the insurance. They charge Goldman Sachs money to provide the insurance. Goldman Sachs now takes the package, they put their fees on it, and they sell it to the bank. But my point in all of this is that as soon as AIG, which at the time was the largest insurance company in the world, issued insurance, technically it wasn't insurance, but for practical purposes, they said for practical purposes it was insurance. They said it wasn't insurance. Regardless, it acted like insurance. And when AIG said, "Okay, good. Well, if the subprime mortgages go bad, or the mortgage-backed securities go bad, you're covered. We're issuing insurance that will cover you." Well, when AIG issued the insurance on the mortgage-backed securities, the credit rating agencies then went, "Oh, we'll give it a AAA rating." And so when Goldman Sachs is selling it, they say to the bank they're selling it to, "Oh, it's got a AAA rating." Well, the rating agencies had their conflicts of interest. AIG was just making billions of dollars in fees doing this, paying no attention to the fact that they could get stung. And when they weren't technically, when these insurance policies weren't technically insurance, that meant they didn't have to have reserves to cover their bets. And that's how those three are related.
The credit rating agencies then, in effect, that are involved in this type of action or activity are in collusion with something that's truly criminal.
Well, look, if they're actually going to rate something, Kim, and do it honestly with integrity, they would have looked at these things to see the garbage that was in them, and they would have never given them AAA ratings. And they would have looked at what AIG was doing, and they would never have given them AAA ratings. So from my perspective, they are clearly complicit in this mess.
And what do they get out of it? the credit rating agencies? They just want to be in the game so bad and make so much money that
Fun.
they'll play their role?
That's right. Money, fees.